Okay, good morning, everybody. How are y'all doing this morning? It's so good to see all of you here. Thank you for coming. My name is Joan Johnson. I work in the government department, and it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Evie Litwak. Hers is a story of resiliency and advocacy. She talks the talk, but more importantly, she walks the walk. She's a shining example to us all, and a reminder that it's not enough to formulate opinions and recognize wrongs. We must also take action and look out for one another. Evie is the founder of Witness to Mass Incarceration, which is a storytelling archival project designed to document the experiences of formerly incarcerated women and LGBTQ people. The goal of this program is to reduce the number of incarcerated people in this country. To help achieve that goal, the Witness to Mass Incarceration attends regular meetings with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and Evie travels tirelessly across the country speaking to all kinds of groups. And Allie. Gotta look at Allie. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Aww, precious star. Evie was formerly incarcerated in 2 federal women's prisons. While incarcerated, that's when her role as an advocate began. When she walked out of prison, she was homeless and penniless, but that did not stop her because her advocacy and dedication to others continued. In addition to Witness to Mass Incarceration, she has a new initiative called the Suitcase Project. She works with college students just like you, and she also works with other organizations in the hopes that we will be able to provide fully stocked suitcases to newly released women and LGBTQ people who far too often leave penniless and homeless just as she did. So please join me in welcoming Evie Litwak to come up here and speak to us.
Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all. I'll start by saying I want to thank Myra Olivia Utera, did I do it right? For arranging this. This is a remarkable trip for me. It's usually never as organized as this is. And I got to meet a lot of the faculty last night, so I'm thrilled to be here. I am a formerly incarcerated Jewish lesbian. And child of 2 survivors of the Holocaust. And I was incarcerated in 2 federal women's prisons and in solitary confinement. I walked out of prison 4 years ago, homeless and penniless for 16 months. And what I'll tell you is that I had 30 years of work experience prior to being in prison because I went to prison at age 60. So I had a lot of work experience, a lot of skills, and I sent out about 200 resumes. You'll hear me say this throughout the day, and I didn't get a single response. I work with formerly incarcerated people across the country. I work with incarcerated people. There's a lot of work to do, and I hope you'll join us. I'm going to show you a bit of film. I have the first talk I'm giving today is not about my story, but it's about conditions inside prison that I don't think people are aware of. Because I believe in my heart that if you were aware that within 10 miles of this prison, people are being sexually assaulted, people are sitting through hurricanes and sewer water, people who have problems, people who have cancer are left to die in prison. If you understood people go to prison to pay a price for a crime they did. They do not go to prison to put their life at risk. And my mission is to make you understand that my life was at risk almost every day in prison, not getting medication, and get people involved so that we can reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. So one of the areas that I partner with, I work with the Department of Justice, Impact Justice Center, and the National PREA, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, I am funded to convene formerly incarcerated LGBTQ people who were sexually assaulted in prison and to advise PREA as to why auditors who go into prison are not capturing the truth of what's going on in prison. It's the first time formerly incarcerated people ever got a grant from the Department of Justice to convene formerly incarcerated people. So with this, I'm going to show you a short 5-minute film. And before I left for prison, the first time I was living with my mother, and she said, "Prison is going to be harder for you than concentration camp was for me." And I looked at her and said, "How could you say that? Are you crazy? You were in Auschwitz." And it was later when I was in solitary confinement that I remembered what she said, which was, I didn't know what was going on. I was a kid. You're an old woman. You're 60 years old. You've had an entire life. And you're going to remember that every day. And she was right. What I knew before prison as a feminist, as an organizer, I knew nothing.
I just did everything he wanted me to do, to not have to be murdered here in prison.
I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, was trafficked and sold into sexual slavery while in prison.
We are a group of people no one has sympathy for because we are presumed to have done something.
Being a trans woman, I was housed in men's facilities.
The atmosphere was very corrupt, very brutal.
The first day I was there, I was approached by a guy. The next day, he told me that we are now married.
They had a guy that was a Crip that began arguing with me.
One day, he came to me and he told me that it's time for me to do my wife duties. And he told me that I needed to perform oral sex on him.
The gangster disciple intervenes. And once he intervenes in the situation, then they basically tie you into their gang. I would be bought and sold between various prison gangs or anybody that basically would present the opportunity to give money.
I told him that I did not feel that I was obligated or I had to do something like this for him. And he grabbed me by my throat and threw me to the wall.
I was slapped. I was beaten.
I couldn't shower alone. I couldn't do anything without him being there.
I asked for safekeeping, and they told me that they didn't have any form of evidence to prove that, and sent me right back to the cell.
They placed me on protective custody, and when I went to the cell, he was waiting for me in the cell. And that's where I was sexually assaulted again.
Made another complaint. Went to that classification committee, which was probably my 4th time. One of them told me, he said, "Well, I think you like this shit." He said, "Well, this is how we'll remedy the problem this time. We'll just send you back over there."
They allowed cultures of torture, violence, sadism to exist in every prison, every jail, because we were nothing. One of the initiatives of Witness is the intersection of climate change with mass incarceration.
When Hurricane Harvey hit, I was on a minimum security facility right outside of Houston in Beaumont. And they didn't prepare for the storm.
If you're an insulin dependent diabetic in a prison that gets hit by a hurricane, you can't get your medication. There's no way in.
No food, no water, no electricity. The sewage had backed up real bad. The toilets, the showers, all of the pipes was just seeping raw sewage.
We're going to have the conversation, is prison about punishment or is prison about rehabilitation? Because in America, prison is about punishment. Formerly incarcerated people, by design, cannot compete. We are 2 steps behind, and we'll never make those 2 steps up. I'm the executive director of Witness to Mass Incarceration. Witness is a storytelling and archival organizing project where we interview
formerly incarcerated women and LGBTQ people and create a digital library for people to look at. We have no moral authority in the United States. We have no right to claim any high ground on any human rights issues as long as there are thousands of prisons with millions of people in them. Unless you are committed to a major action, then all we get are a tweak here and a tweak there. I don't want reform. I want it abolished.
You can leave that up. Oh, never mind. Well, did you like it? Were you comfortable with it? I hope you were a little uncomfortable, actually, is what I'm hoping. Sexual violence in prison is a nightmare. This is the work I do. I interview formerly incarcerated people. I prepare these 5-minute videos. I show them to audiences. It's my belief that you will not be able to turn away from this kind of testimony, this kind of bearing witness, and that you will maybe join us in our fight to reduce the number of people that are in prisons. We had a prison strike recently that ended in September. Mostly male prisons do this. In women's prisons, you have 75% of the women are mothers. They will do nothing to jeopardize their ability to see their kids. They will not protest. I'm an old agitator. I tried to get everybody to protest. Nobody would listen to me. So the strike was a 3-week strike with the intention of drawing attention to the conditions inside prison, which are horrendous, and to restore voting rights. Now, was it successful? Not very many people participated because there's 24/7 lockdown of all the prisoners, so it's hard to do anything. But the media got hold of it, and so to the extent that the media publicized the strike and made people aware of a little bit, it was successful. The leader, Kevin Rashid Johnson, just to show you what prisons do, he's the leader of this and many other strikes. They move him from, Oregon, Texas, Florida, every time he has a strike, in an attempt to neutralize him. The more you try to neutralize us, the more we fight back. It only makes us more determined to work on these issues. I speak from personal experience. I am 67. My case started in 1997. I was arrested. Didn't go to trial for 12 years. Was convicted. My conviction was overturned. The Second Circuit overturned 2 counts completely. 1 count was dismissed. 1 was vacated, meaning they could come back at me for that 1 count, which they did. I went to prison the 2nd time. So from the time of my arrest to the time I went off probation, was 20 years. I lost 20 years of my life. And the minute that you're arrested, everything that you've built up, your reputation over a lifetime, your family, your friends, your extended family, and it takes maybe 5 minutes, and I kid you not, for people to disappear from your life. My finances, I went from being comfortable and ready to retire and work on philanthropy to 0. And no matter what, I came out of prison knowing I would spend the rest of my life fighting around this issue. Nothing is more important to me than to get the women out of prison who I was in with, who shouldn't be there in the first place. So we not only have the world's largest prison population, 2.3 million, but we have, at the state level, and the harshest felony disenfranchisement for people. So I'm going to just check my states. 34 states bar citizens from voting. If you have a conviction, 3 states bar you for life, and that's Kentucky, Florida, and Iowa. So this November, some of you may know that in Florida, there's a ballot measure which is to allow 1.5 million convicted felons to be able to vote, and I sincerely hope it passes. And Florida's a tough state to judge. It's 50-50 right now. But if that passes, my hope is that other states will allow it, because whatever you did one time in your life, whatever mistake you made, shouldn't be a life sentence for any reason, and it is. There's a particular case in Texas, which if anybody wants to work on this, is a case that's close to my heart. A woman named Crystal Mason served 3 years on tax evasion, came out of prison, it was 2016. Her mother said, go vote for Hillary Clinton. She went down to vote. Now, she wasn't on the registers, so she took a provisional ballot. Sometimes I have to check my notes. Her provisional ballot was never counted, but she was arrested for voting, and she was sent to prison just last week for 5 years. She made a mistake. One of the things that we have to do is make people, neighbors, friends, aware that as easily as this woman made a mistake in voting, every person in the room can make that mistake. And we cannot have a country where you can send someone 5 years to jail. So one mission I have, which I've not started, is to see if there's any interest in trying to get this woman out of prison. She lost her appeal, but it's outrageous to me. I will tell you that if it was a white man who went to vote, he would never have gotten prison time. I will also tell you the same day she was convicted, a white man was given no jail time for working to get elected and doing illegal things. So we have to deal with the systemic racism that goes on. We have to deal with the fact that people of color and LGBTQ people really make up the disproportionate bulk of the people that are in prison. And she has 2 young children, and she hasn't seen them for 3 years, and now she won't see them for another 5. The same district attorney in Texas that did this to her also arrested, I just want to read her name to you, Rosa Ortega, for mistakenly voting. She was brought here as an infant. She's a permanent resident status. She voted. They gave her 8 years in prison, and then she was to be deported. She lived in this country since she was 1 year old. They offered her to leave the country instead of her 8-year prison, but understand, her entire family, her entire life is here. They drop you off in Mexico in a very dangerous area, and you're just left there. You have to start your life over, and you don't have a clue what it's like to live in a country you've never lived in. So, the prison strikes try to change conditions, but they don't. So I'm going to focus on slave labor, medical, sexual violence, dental care, and try to give you a sense of how bad prisons are. And if at any point you have a question, I'm happy to take it, or at the end. I put 2.3 million, I'm sorry, but my 2.3 million people are in prison. But a quarter of those people, over 500,000 of those people, are pre-trial and have been convicted of nothing. So in New York City, we have Rikers Island, which has 10,000 people in it. 8,500 of the 10,000 have not been convicted of a crime and are in prison solely because they could not afford to pay bail, which was under $3,000. So we are willing to house people for years. They're not in prison. Okay? Can you hear me? We are as long as everyone in this room and everyone in every room listens and doesn't take a next action, then people will sit in prison. Because people like me need your help. We need to raise our voices. 500,000 people every single day are sitting in prison. And in New York and Rikers Island, you have a lot of young young black teenage boys. Khalil Browder was picked up for supposedly stealing a backpack, He was put at age 16 in solitary confinement for 2 years. When he came out of solitary confinement, they dismissed his case because he didn't steal the backpack. He managed to be home for a couple of months and he hung himself. You can't put a 16-year-old person in solitary confinement and expect them to ever be normal again. But we should not be putting people in prison, A, if they can't make bail, and we shouldn't be putting people in prison unless it's a serious crime. What we do is put people in prison, so that's 500,000 people. Of the rest of the proportion, you have a lot of people who are first-time offenders, a lot of people who wrote one bad check. There are people in prison for doing nonsense that once separated from family never recover from the experience. So I had a friend, Ramona Brandt, who died this past year. Excuse me. She was in prison 21 years. President Obama gave her clemency. Within a year of the clemency, she died in her sleep of a heart attack. In prison for 21 years, she never got preventative medication. Nobody does. There's nothing, there's no scans, no MRIs, there's no nothing in prison. If you get cancer in prison, say goodnight. You die, and there's no investigative reporting on the number of people who die in prison. There's a lot of lying, but I saw people die. We all saw people die. And it's outrageous that you've never seen a story. Has anybody ever seen a story about a dozen people dying in prison? Because this is unreported in one of the areas that need to be researched. So what happens is 6:30 on a Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, you can go to medical to sign in and say you have a problem. Then 10 days later, you get to see a physician's assistant. Now understand, if you've broken your leg and you don't get to see someone for 10 days, you're expected to walk on that leg and you're expected to work. So we're not talking about colds here. We're talking about basic human rights being violated almost daily. In one prison in West Virginia where I was, there had to be 100 women walking on walkers and canes that were untreated with broken feet, broken toes, broken legs. I came into prison, my second prison, January of 2014. I was bleeding when I was urinating. I had to call an officer to prove I was bleeding, because when I said it the first time, they didn't believe it. And when she saw it, she took a report. I didn't get a colonoscopy till July, 6 months later. Now, had that been a serious colon issue, my loss of blood would have killed me within a matter of days. I was just lucky it wasn't serious, because they don't rush to take you. I used to think everybody in prison had 3 teeth, from old movies or old presentations. I attribute it to lack of self-care, and I couldn't have been more wrong. To see a dentist in prison, you can only do 2 things in prison with a dentist. You can get your teeth cleaned, or you can get your teeth pulled. Those are your only options. And when your teeth are pulled, they don't give you dentures. So there are many people in prison who, if you're long enough in prison and you don't have dental care, have no teeth and have a very difficult time eating. So I put a note in that I wanted to get a cleaning, and I got back a note. I put the note in 2010. I got the note back saying, you're on our list, and we're currently treating people from 2007. So I don't know how much you know about periodontic disease, but if you get gum disease, you can die. And by the way, when they pull your teeth in prison, there's no Novocaine. They're not allowed to use any pain relief. So there are no root canals, no bridges, no implants, just pulling of the teeth. I showed you 2 people I work with. Zahara Green, who's a trans woman of color, who was in prison for 5 years. She was held in solitary most of that time for her protection. But if someone paid a guard to open that cell door, which they did, she was raped. And Zahara was given strip searches every day by opposite sex officers, same sex officers. Zahara was literally harassed every day. The second gentleman, Roderick Johnson, was a sex slave sold by gangs to other gangs, $5 for this and $10 for that, and he went through that for 18 months. I don't know how you can be normal after being sold into sex slavery, and yet I interviewed him, and I'm hoping he becomes a major public speaker. In 2003, the Human Rights Watch prepared a devastating report, along with the ACLU, to Congress about the level of sexual violence in prison. And Congress passed a bill called the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Excuse me. 12 years, but just so you know, when you pass a bill in Congress, doesn't mean it gets enforced. You have to have, for a bill to get enforced, that's why a lot of bills in Congress don't go anywhere, because there's no standards or enforcement. In 2012, 9 years later, 9 years after knowing that people were getting raped in prison, if you're a young boy in prison, or if you're under the age of 25, you're gonna get raped every day. And most people will not talk about this because they're embarrassed and feel they don't want to expose an area so that people don't think they're weak. So for 9 years after Congress knew that sexual violence was off the charts, they finally prepared standards and trained auditors to go in and look at how much sexual violence there is in prison. So the auditors started in about 2013, so there's been 5 years of auditing. So I convened, as I mentioned, 10 formerly incarcerated people. I'm going to grow this group to include everybody. And I sent them a list of their auditing reports for the prisons they were in. All of the prisons they were in passed, meaning that one of the standards is that there be zero tolerance in prisons for officers, whether consensual or not, to have sex with inmates. Officers having sex with inmates is a crime. And everybody passed. Everybody was in compliance. There's not a person the 10 of us represent 40 prisons because people were in multiple prisons. We are laughing at these reports. Not because the PRC, the Prior Resource Center, is doing a bad job, but because the prisons are not providing the information to the auditors that really shows what's going on in prison. So you here in Texas, there's an institute, this summer, Texas Pride Initiative produced a report called The Myth of Zero Tolerance. And the subheading was, I don't believe you, so you might as well get used to it, which is exactly what Roderick said. Officers do not believe you. And it offered some insight. There were 1,567 complaints from LGBTQ people alone, and given to the Texas Board of Corrections. What is it, TJ? Well, whatever the initials are. Of the 1,567, 12 were deemed reasonable. 12 were deemed substantiated, which means that the Texas officials who run these prisons believe that 99% of the LGBT people are lying. And we should see, they don't believe us any more than people believe women at hearings for judicial candidates. The auditors that come in do not see those 1,567 complaints, they see the 12. So this remains a big problem. I was in a prison called FCI Tallahassee in Tallahassee, and 20 of the 20, I saw this, so this is my personal experience. 20 of the 21 male officers there were sleeping or having sex with 4 to 6 women. And it was in the open. They didn't even try to make an attempt to cover it. And this is how it works, and this is why you can't capture it. An officer would whisper to a mother whose kids are coming on the weekend, "Do you want to see your kids?" And she'd say, "Yes." And he'd say, "Then I want a blowjob." Now the mother's put in a bad position. She has to do that because she won't see her kids. If she says no, two things will happen. She will either be put in solitary confinement, and excuse me, I was in solitary confinement with 60 women who did not sleep with the officers and were there as a result of retaliation. So I saw it firsthand. She's either going to be put in solitary, or if she's in Florida, just to be a prick, he'll have her transferred to FCI Dublin in California, so she's 3,000 miles away from her children. If she says yes, two things can happen. The officer will be forever nervous about the woman reporting, whether they have sex 1 day, 4 days, or 1 year. The officer will always worry. And if the officer is concerned that you might talk or that you've told your friends, you're going to solitary. And then in solitary, you're not going to see your kids. The other thing that can happen is you go along with the officer, and then the officer calls you up and says, "Meet me here, meet me there," and the sex becomes more, you have to be available to this officer at the officer's beck and call. So I was in a unit when lights out was 11 o'clock, an officer came in, took one of the younger women, and in his hurry to have sex with her, he forgot to lock the door that separates the sleeping unit where we were in with his office. So of course a dozen women went out to look, see what was going on, and they saw him having sex with her. He wasn't fired. He was transferred to a prison on the same compound. But the women who witnessed this, and the person and the woman who was having sex, were all put in solitary. So until there's enough evidence of sexual violence so that you can't escape it, so that it's overwhelming, so that legislators have to do something. Right now, prison and jails are self-regulating systems. They report to no one. In solitary confinement, 4 people run solitary. They report to no one. So not only does the jury send you, convict you of something and you go to prison, but now you have people who behind a wall can do whatever they want with you and get away with it. So the only way for that to change is to focus in on areas, to do some research, to write a policy report, and to get legislators to change the way in which the reporting is done. Basically, Texas needs independent reporting bodies in order to stop these kind of problems. There's no Me Too movement in prison. However, and with your help and with other young people across the country, I'm trying to develop my little movement. I call it Text-to-Vix. I ask people to, you'll see it later, you'll get a card, to join my text witness list, so that if there is an action, which is not very often, but I hope it'll be more often in Texas, that you'll join with me and to send a text to your senator. In Texas, there's, as you know, a lot of 100-degree days, increasingly, and until about a year ago, Texas prisons did not have air conditioning. And I just want to ask you, if I asked anybody I want to see by a show of hands, how many people can sit outside today, for 24 hours, never go in an air-conditioned room? Can anybody stand outside? What would happen? You'd melt, right? Anybody? I wouldn't stand outside, but understand that Texas prisons, particularly the tents that they're putting these immigrant children in, have no air conditioning. When it is 100 degrees, 100 degrees on the outside, it's 120 degrees on the inside. There's one man whose skin fell off in Texas, off his body. This is an outrage. And by the way, Texas prisons raise pigs, and the pigs have air conditioning, but the human beings do not. And that was on a 60 Minutes broadcast, which anybody can look at, and the Marshall Project did a good paper on it, which I highly recommend people leave. All you have to do is look at Marshall Project, or write me and I'll send you a link. Let me see. So one of my deepest concerns is the fact that there's no emergency policy, except for Louisiana, and I'll give you the backdrop. There's no emergency policy that requires the evacuation of incarcerated people during times of hurricanes, when governors order the evacuation of their citizens and their pets. And I'm a pet lover, so I agree with that. What they do is they have incarcerated people prepare the sandbags to block the cities and protect the cities. And then they put them back in prison, and they call that shelter in place. We're going to shelter in place. Because they boneheadedly believe, because the building is made of cement, there should be no issue. When every part of history since Katrina shows differently, and I'm going to lay out the history for you in a minute. They also bring incarcerated people outside to clean up after hurricanes. They don't pay them. So we're there not only punished for cashing a bad check or committing a bank robbery, we're there as slaves of the state. Make no mistake, we are slaves, being used to do whatever they want. We're their property, they're supposed to protect us, they do not protect us. So I'm going to give you, and let me say this, floods do not discriminate. When there's a flood, and there's always a flood during a hurricane, everybody's drain pipes back up, everybody's toilets back up. So if you ever hear a prison official say, we had no issues, they are lying. And I know this firsthand, because the people that I know who were incarcerated, including Roderick, who was in Beaumont, Texas, which was hit by the hurricane. I have hundreds of people that I'm waiting to interview in Texas, and that's another research project if anybody wants to work on that. I hope to produce a paper to embarrass the government into ordering emergency evacuation of everybody. You have 147,000 people sitting in prisons. They take out 6,000 and they leave everybody else. They take out the easiest 6,000. And even when they take out the 6,000, they stick them on a gym floor, or in Texas a couple of years ago, they put them on a highway. I don't know if you've ever saw the pictures. They had them on a highway 7 days, doing nothing but sitting in the sun. We don't deserve to have heat stroke because we did something wrong. So, Katrina was 13 years ago. Mayor Ray Nagin was the first to evacuate a major city. The sheriff, whose name is, and it's very important for you to vote for sheriffs. It's very important for you to vote. And know what people stand for. Sheriff Marlon Guzman said, prisoners will stay where they belong. I have generators, city inmates would hang tight. So Louisiana is one of the incarceration capitals. And at the time, in August of 2005, 6,800 people were incarcerated who had parking tickets or something, or were smoking pot. 6,800 people ended up, some of them dying, some of them having a lifelong illness, because, again, we have a huge population that's really innocent sitting in prison. So the criminalization of these 6,800 people became clear. People were stifling, people died. After this, many people died. People saw the bodies floating out of the prisons. But this sheriff said nobody died, when in fact somebody had. And there were electric cell doors, so the power went down. So there was no way to escape sitting in feces up to your neck. There was no way. And they said the prisoners riot, and I have to laugh. What the fuck? How do you riot in a cell? How do you riot in your bed? What do? Throw your mattress up? A riot means someone's hurt. A riot is a scare word designed to tell you that we're violent people. I met no violent people in prison. And I was in 2 prisons. I met people who, due to circumstances, ended up incarcerated. The ACLU produced a report based on 100 interviews about the horrifying circumstances, and a lawyer from the Southern Poverty Center in 2012 sued the U.S. government and won, and got it's called a consent decree, 46-page consent decree. Louisiana has to move their prisoners. It's extremely expensive, so guess what? Louisiana's population of prisoners is decreasing, because if they have to care for them properly, it's too expensive. In spite of Katrina's impact, there's been no major legislation 13 years later and no intentional evacuations. And we never learn. We don't change. We watch the same problems over and over again. I lived in New York during 2011 when we had Mayor Bloomberg. In New York, and the entire lower Manhattan, excuse me, was evacuated. And their pets. 72 shelters were set up for people and their pets. Now this man closed down the subway station, all construction. He closed the city down 3 days before the storm. Guess what he didn't close down? Rikers Island, which is a landfill. It's built on a landfill in the water, and it was the most at-risk population. And he also, the other prison in New York, which is in Brooklyn, on the water. And people, there's no major research report on what happened in New York. There's no major research report on what happened in Puerto Rico, on what happened in Hurricane Harvey, on what happened in Florida. But there are people who can testify as to what happened. So that happened. And in Texas, as I said, 6,000 were moved. And Governor Rick Scott, I don't know how many of you saw him say evacuate or die. He said it over and over and over again. And for me, that's a very hard thing, because I wonder, who are we? Who are we? Evacuate or die? Why doesn't that include us? We are people. In 2016, Aliceville, which is a women's federal prison in Alabama, was hit directly by a tornado. If you went to the BOP's website, it said there was only slight damage to the administration building. A reporter got in, plus all of us had, the mothers and the sisters and the daughters of the people who were inside got letters. The sleeping unit's roof blew off, and the people were experiencing like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, with everything, hair dryers and anything that was loose was spinning and could have hit them and killed them. There was such extensive damage, and what's remarkable is that the BOP can get away with lying. And I happen to like a lot of the people from the BOP who I work with, and I like a lot of the departments, the Texas Department, who I've had contact with. But something has to change radically to require accountability and the truth. And that's one of the things I'm working on. So these women were locked down for 6 months, 24/7, with eating frozen dinners and not being allowed out because everything was destroyed on this prison. So I told you about the state of Texas, and I told you, so here's where we stand. No dental care, no medical care, no ability, by the way, if you're in a hurricane, 75% of the people inside prison take medications, seizure, blood pressure, psychotropics, antidepressants. Many people in prison are on antidepressants, anti-anxiety. What do you think? Do you think that there's a doctor going around cell to cell in sewer water, handing you out your pill while you're stuck in your cell? No. I have a heart condition. If I had been stuck in that cell, the level of stress that I would have experienced and the level of fear that I wouldn't get out alive would be enough to cause a heart attack with medication. So think about the level of fear people have. Imagine yourself with water up to here and no way out. It's frightening. So the other thing I will focus on is prison labor, slave labor, which I don't believe is reported on enough. So federal prisons have call centers. They're called Unicore. Excuse me 1 second. I knew I couldn't do a mic and have a drink at the same time. I was incarcerated with a woman who got 25 years because of telemarketing. She got 25 years because her script, that the government claimed the script she used to sell crap to people was a lie, and that she was selling things that she knew wasn't good. So in the same prison where she's convicted, we have a call center. We're making telemarketing calls and selling using the same script that all call centers use to sell crap to senior citizens and children. And these call centers make millions of dollars. Now the issue is not that we're underpaid. The issue is we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be making profits for prison while we're in prison. We are also, the call centers, we're your 411. When you call information, you're getting a prisoner. Hilton Hotel, when you were calling for a reservation, you got us. When you were trying to book Greyhound, we were booking your Greyhound tickets. People don't know the extent to which prisoners are used to do business. We're paid 6 cents to $1 an hour, and they make millions of dollars. Now, Georgia has 53 prisons, 33,000 people. In the southern part of Georgia, the plantations, the old plantations, are still there, and people grow crops. And guess who's growing the Georgia crops, whether it's cotton or oranges? It's us. Guess who's growing salmon, GMO salmon? It's us. We are the people that provide the Postal Service with the bags that they walk with. We make the Army, the Navy, and Air Force bags. We package for everybody from Microsoft to Victoria's Secrets. The list is too long, and I'm too blown away by this list. But basically, the reason you have 2.3 million people in there is because we are a workforce for America's corporation, America's postal system, America's grow America's crops. I'm just going to see if there's anything. And more importantly, we are your firefighters. And it got a little attention last month with the California fires when there was an article written, which is true, that 30% of the firefighters who were fighting the California fires were prisoners. In prisons across this country, inmates are trained to be firefighters. So when I was in West Virginia, we were literally the people that were called in West Virginia. I want to thank them. Please take my card. Please use your cell phone. Text the number and join my mailing list. I promise I won't annoy you otherwise. And if anybody wants to, I'll say this in advance, anybody wants to work with me through a teacher or talk to me, I'm 100% available. And I lost my place. So firefighters. In West Virginia, when there was a fire in the city, they had called us. Now my feeling about the California fighters is some people were arguing that it's unfair that we got paid $1 to fight a fire, that we should at least get $15 an hour. And I said, fuck that. They should be released from prison. I mean, they put their lives at risk. Whatever they did before should be now measured and balanced, and they should be let out of prison. In 1971, there were 200,000 people in prison. A handful of laws, the Rockefeller drug laws, were put in place, and almost 500,000 people were arrested for pot. Some of those people who were potheads are still in prison, even though legislators who own companies that make pot and are making money haven't released all the pot lifers. In the 80s and 90s, what we did is the lobby for correctional officers and the lobby for private prisons pushed their senators into making longer sentences, making minimums for people. So we went from being a country that had only 200,000 people in prison, which is the right amount, to a country that had 2.2 million because people wanted to make money off of it. And they did. Industries were created. So when I walked into prison, you're given a little bag your first day of toiletries. And I had the deodorant, which cracked me up because it was called Maximum Security. I just thought that was funny as hell. I saw that all these products that we were getting was made by Bob Barker. So I was worried it was Bob Barker, the host of Price is Right, who was an animal lover, and I would have been very disappointed. Some of you are too young to know who that was. But it turns out it's a it's a North Carolina state senator who for the last 40 years has been making anywhere from $300 million in his family to $700 million. Is there no competition in New York, or who's getting the kickbacks here? Because it's the only company that supplies prisons. And I assure you there's got to be a competitor out there. Prisons are built in rural areas. Why? There's no employment. So there's 3 jobs in rural areas: post office, gas station, general store. You have a town of 3,000 people, you have no employment. If you put a prison there, what happens? You have to put up hotels, restaurants, movie theaters for the visitors that come to visit the people in prison. The problem is that in putting prisons in all these rural areas, the economy in those areas are now based on people don't want to give up their jobs. So what incentive could these people possibly have to say, let's lower the prison population? The only way to do that is to give the town something else to do, which I hope will happen. And I will end by saying it's not an accident that the state of Colorado, which is the first state to end solitary confinement, because solitary confinement officers make triple. It's not an accident they were also the first state to legalize medical marijuana. And why I say that is prisons need the money they make off of prisoners. So once Colorado had another source of income from medical marijuana, it could afford to release people, to not pay people as much. And I believe, I say this and people don't believe me, mark my words. If you look at states that have that legalized marijuana, look at their decrease in prison, in the number of people they've released. I have a lot more to say, but I don't know what time it is. We have till 10:50. Should I allow for some questions now, or? Okay. So I'll say this. Try to remember one thing, if you remember anything from what I said, that there are 500,000 people sitting in prison who have not been convicted of a crime. We, formerly incarcerated people, and our advocates, the teachers in this room, and our allies are not enough to make this change. We need support. Even if it's in the form of texting someone, we agree with this. Even if it's in the form of coming out to one protest. But if you want to make a difference in someone's life, someone whose life has really been destroyed, then go one step further than just listening to me in this classroom. Do one thing that helps someone. If it's not about prison, let it be about something else. But commit yourself to helping another person every day, because that will make you a better person. I know, because I would not have survived if people didn't help me. I thank you very much for listening, and now I will take your questions. Wait.
This may be a personal question, but do you mind telling us?
Could you talk louder into that mic?
I can put it closer. There we go. Do you mind telling us what it was that you were incarcerated for?
That is the first question I always get, and I'm going to tell you never to ask a person who's formerly incarcerated what they're incarcerated for. And I'm going to tell you why. What you're doing is forcing them to mark a certain point of, you're going to always remember me by my crime. I am far more than my crime. I'm 67 years old. I was a concert pianist. I was a PhD candidate in psychology. I have a list of achievements. But I have no problem telling you, but don't ever ask. I teach people, don't ask people. No, because you don't want to be identified as the worst mistake in your life. And with that, I'll tell you, my crime was tax evasion, and you will remember that. That lady who spoke to us committed this crime. But will you remember I was a concert pianist? Will you remember I was a public speaker? You will remember that crime. So as a rule, never ask a person what they did. If they want to share it with you, they will. And almost no one does. There's 1,000 people like me speaking across America. But America has 70 million people who've been convicted of a crime. And that includes misdemeanors. 70 million. 1 out of 3 people have been convicted of something. I guarantee you in this room I'm not alone. And I don't want anybody to be forced to come out. I tell everybody, I came out as a lesbian, I'll come out as a criminal, I don't give a shit. And the more of us that come out, the better it is. So, because then people will know we're normal, we're regular. 70 million people, 1 in 3. So you know people who've done this, but they don't want to talk about it. It's a bad part of their life and they want to move on. Most of the women want to go have a baby and build a family. Next question. This gentleman over there?
Oh, no, I was just signaling.
Oh, come on, I know you have questions. You can ask me anything. I really have nothing I won't say.
So you talked a lot about female and LGBT community people getting a lot of benefits whenever they come out of prison.
Benefits?
Like you help them.
Okay, I'll explain that.
Sorry, wrong choice of words there. So I am bisexual and I grew up less privileged, but I don't consider myself part of the LGBT community. So if I were to go to prison and come out, would you still help me even though I don't identify with that group of people?
I would help anybody. Let me clarify something. The reason that I focus on women and LGBTQ people is because they are among the most marginalized, have the most difficult time finding jobs when they come home. And there are literally 3 dozen men organizations that have set up and are already helping men. There's only one of me. So when I go, I try to raise, I am in the process of raising $2,000 for 1 suitcase for 1 person. So I'm not helping a million people here. What I'm trying to do is make people feel, and I'm trying to do this through synagogues and churches, mostly synagogues because that's a home base for me. But if I can get synagogues in Dallas and Austin and New York and Chicago and Los Angeles to do this, I'll get publicity. And then I'll be able to do, instead of 10 suitcases, 100 or even 1,000. And then groups will understand. Because when I was released from prison, I was put on a Greyhound bus, given $30. I landed in Port Authority to no one. So I'm walking around Port Authority after being in prison for a year. I can't begin to tell you how upset. I had to not cry. It's overwhelming. And to know that you have nothing. I have my mother who couldn't help me because she's incapacitated, and no one else. And there are not very many people who are going to raise their hand and volunteer to help. So it's not the suitcase. It's meeting someone at the bus stop, giving them the suitcase, taking them out for a meal, taking them to wherever they have to go, because you usually have to report to an officer. So I want them to begin a relationship with the community that may become inclusive, and my hope is we start a trend, and that people stop being less fearful. Now, I mentioned earlier my parents are Holocaust survivors. During 1939, Hitler had a propaganda minister, Hermann Goebbels, who told Germany, which was a Western civilized nation, that Jews did this, Jews did that, and people believed them. If you repeat a lie long enough, everybody will believe it. The law enforcement has told you we're not safe. We're dangerous. Most people are afraid of us. I'm not afraid of us. I think we're among the best workers because we're so grateful to come out. We're so grateful to start again. We're so grateful to just not be in prison. So one of the things that we have to overcome is the public's perception, their lack of empathy for us. We're survivors of prison, and we are the least empathetic group of anybody because we're not perceived of as victims because we committed or did something horrible. But everybody in this room did something that could have landed them in prison just as easily as I got landed in prison. That's the frightening part. But yes, it's not just the suitcase. I would try to give you community. Go ahead.
Thank you. You spoke about the evacuation of cities during storms, and until today, I never thought that they never evacuated prisons, actually. But thinking about it, the logistical implications of that, and it's a hard task to imagine. And what could have been done better, from your perspective? What obstructions needed to be overcome, and what steps should be done in the future to prevent it from happening?
The reason they don't evacuate incarcerated people is the cost. Number one, you have to put them someplace. Right now, where they put them is in prisons that are already overcrowded. So they're put on like a gymnasium floor. And I'll ask you again, can you sleep on a floor? How will your body feel after 7 days on this floor? They don't give you a bed. They need a physical, just like they have shelters for people and pets, they need shelters to physically move formerly incarcerated people. They need buildings. They need transportation. If Texas was to get hit again and you had to move 147,000 people which are incarcerated, it would cost over $2 billion. It's the right thing to do, but they won't do it because the state would lose that kind of money for one hurricane. Because you have to give overtime to officers, you have to, medically, you have to have the medical charts for 147,000 people. You have to give everybody with diabetes their pills. To organize this requires something the prisons are not set up to do because prisons were not set up to be 2.3 million people. Prisons were set up to be 200,000 for some people in the country that really have to be taken out of society. Now we have kids who are shoplifting. So we're not prepared to handle the cost, and that's why it's not done. So my theory is if you force people to pay this price to keep us safe, then maybe they'll think about not putting us in or doing more restorative justice or alternatives to incarceration. Nobody under the age of 19 should be put in a prison or should see a prison, with rare exception. I believe they need social workers, they need psychologists, they need an alternative universe to get better. And there's proof. Anybody wants to look at it, the New York Times did a great article on Norway's prison system. 60 Minutes did a 20-minute piece, which you should watch, on Norway's prison system. They have 20 years for serial killers. They only arrest serial killers. They rehabilitate them. They live well. They come out and they're okay. And we can be doing, I can understand arguments for people worrying about serial rapists and serial killers, but not anybody else. Because a lot of people who steal for food, because they're hungry. I was with a woman, and I told this story last night also, whose husband was divorcing her and wanted the kids. She couldn't afford a lawyer, so she stole money from the corporation that she worked in. She got caught, she kept her kids, she knew she'd face prison, she set it up so that her parents would take care of them while she was in prison, and the corporation that she worked for went to the district attorney and said, we don't want this woman in prison. We understand why she did this, and we don't want to press charges. In fact, we want to employ her, and we want to help her. The DA did it anyway. So there's a movement around this country by us and our allies to change. If anybody's been a district attorney for 20, 30 years, then they've been part of the problem, not part of the solution. So we need new people who, when they look at a mother's circumstances, takes a case at a time and said, no, she made a bad judgment call, she did a terrible thing, but it's not something she deserves to go away for. And I'm against separating any mother and father from their children. And in America, we separate both parents. So the kids are given away. While I'm at it, I was in prison, and this is very, very common. I was in prison with a lot of women from Tennessee, towns of 3,000 people, where there's no employment. And crystal meth. They were all on crystal meth. They all had no teeth. This was a young, beautiful 20-year-old girl who was in prison. Her mother did sell drugs, but they arrested 27 members of the family because the kids were in the car while she sold the drugs, or the kids' aunts picked up a telephone, or the grandmother opened the front door. What they did is they arrested 3 generations of one family, and then they gave everybody under 16 to foster care. And nobody knows where they are. 27, a whole lineage. Because one person sold drugs? I don't think so. And that one person sold drugs because there was no other way to earn a living. You know, if you look at where the opioid crisis is, you're looking at people who have been not given the advantage of an education. They've not been given training for work. And we need to take the money out of prison and put it into pre-K. We need to start young and give everybody in this country a chance to have an education, and we will have no people stealing. If there's no hunger, then tens of thousands of people wouldn't be in prison.
Do we have one last question?
Hi, I enjoyed your talk. I'm a film student, and film departments are always looking for projects. So have you reached out to all the universities and schools that you go to find out if they have a film department, that they might do some work?
I'll happily work with your film department. I'll tell you what I'd like to see in this state is interviewing formerly incarcerated people around specific issues. Just like I did around sexual violence, I can identify 10 or 12 issues off the top of my head but we need to be interviewing and memorializing these experiences and then editing them down and trying to show short videos for education. From my standpoint, it's the most powerful way to impact people. But I am a one-person operation, so you're looking at the sales force, the marketing department, the interviewer. The only thing I'm not is the filmmaker, and I give talks. So if anybody knows anybody in an institution where I can speak, that would be very helpful to me. And I'll ask one last time, please put me on your cell phones. I promise you I won't annoy you. I need some of you to be part of my text to this army. And I thank you for listening to me.